everyone online. We do have a quorum. We have Donna, Jessica, and Michael in the room, and we have Colin Lawrence online. So we do have four. And we'll see how it goes. Where we go from here.
Okay, we're gonna go with the agenda, I think, unless people have changes to the agenda. Okay, I skipped the emergency instructions, which is we go out the door here and in either direction and down.
Colin, can you give me a quick thumbs up just so I know you can hear us online?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect, and we can hear you as well, Colin.
Yeah.
Perfect. Open to the public for items not related to the agenda. If you're joining us online, you can unmute or turn your video on if you have anything during this portion. Okay. Announcements. I do not have any announcements. Does anyone have any? Okay, we can get right down to business. Starting with the land development regulation amendments. The multiple structures site plan requirement. This is item 5 on the agenda.
Yeah, so something that was brought to our attention by our development review staff is with the last round of amendments, we exempted up to a fourplex building as a building type from site plan. But we also allowed multiple structures on a single lot under 2 acres. So we can have up to three structures with up to 4 units in each structure on a single lot under 2 acres. So that from the development review side raised some concerns that you could have 3 fourplexes on a lot and not have site plan, both the process and the substance. The standards apply. So this is what I outlined in the memo is what I sort of had to say about it. The commission has every option between sort of applying site plan to fourplexes or lower even. I'm sort of dialing back what you've already done, up to not requiring site plan for any of it. And sort of I outlined 4 options that fall between those 2 endpoints.
Well, I thought that if we're limiting it to four dwelling units, that we're losing the opportunity for density in some areas. So I thought we could do it maybe in two tiers, if you like. I would say go for 8 dwelling units in MSU and higher, and maybe 6 for LSNs. Because you know, there's a lot of 1 acres or 43,000 square feet. You can put 8 in there very easily.
Yeah.
And no, it's a
To clarify, this isn't. Or sorry, are you?
Because you could go higher, but
Yeah, so
given the DRB's concerns, I didn't want to overdo it.
yeah, so it's the staff people, not the DRB itself. They haven't considered this question. Colin, I think what you're going to ask is we're not talking about whether to allow a certain number of units on the lot. It's whether site plan review would be required or not. Like, I don't think there's appetite for dialing back what we did in the fall. So we'd still allow up to 3, up to 4 unit buildings, so a total of 12 units, without having to subdivide. But the question is, where do you trigger site plan, which is a different set of standards about screening your dumpsters and lighting and parking and other things like that.
So
yeah.
For Colin, I was saying trigger at 8 for MSN and higher density zones and 6 for LSN.
Or yeah, I mean, I so yes, Kelsey, yours, like that was my question. I mean, I definitely see where you're coming from, Michael. I guess my one concern is that if we're already doing a pretty big jump in the amount of density we're allowing in a lot of these areas. And I guess my concern is that if we're some of these larger projects, say a project that had 8 on it, I guess my concern would be that if it isn't a subject to site plans, it might allow a development that is considered pretty undesirable, perhaps by, because it wouldn't have to meet some site plan standards. And I guess my concern will be if that itself would be more likely to cause backlash to these higher density allowances than if there was more, framework around exactly how these, 2 fourplexes on a single lot would have to use. I mean, I'm not dead against saying limited to 8. I guess I was my initial when I was looking at it. The staff number 4, I like that vibe, but I definitely could be persuaded one way or the other.
I mean, it still requires administrative officer,
Yes.
so. it
Yeah,
works.
I guess what I was thinking about is the kind of potential assistance that planning and zoning can provide for somebody who maybe is a very amateur developer and, say they want to put 8 units on 2 acres. Well, there's a lot of other things in the ordinances that presumably they have to go along with too. And some of them are just suggestions or, do it if you can, and one of those is solar orientation. And do we just sort of let that all slide and go by the wayside? If there's no department review, if there's not a review, because I mean, even when there is a review, I don't know how much they hold that up as, hey, you should really consider doing this because it has big implications about the future energy use of these units,
Yeah, so.
whether or not there can be solar on the roof, whether or not, you've got,
Yeah.
sunshine and passive solar in the units themselves.
Yeah, so importantly, there are some standards that apply at a zoning permit level. So, you put in any house, you need a zoning permit. And then there are other things that apply only if you have a site plan. And so some things like, just for example, today I was helping review an application and there are some of the sort of harmony with the site, harmony with the structures around it, like some of those considerations that are not to the level of design review, but are a little bit further down that road, that are only applicable in site plan. So yes, solar orientation to maximize solar
Yeah,
gain
it's-
is one of those things.
It's one of those things that you really wanna establish that very early on in the planning. And, but I was thinking perhaps you do it on a, units per acre because, 8 units on a 2-acre site, I mean, that's not all that dense.
No.
It's not really all that dense at all, so do you need a site plan review just, to make sure that it fits? Probably not, but, a site plan review that says, oh, if you do these narrow lot type development, you orient it this way, it's gonna potentially be a lot better, or maybe planning and zoning doesn't really get involved in that discussion very much.
At site plan, they definitely do, for that kind of thing. I think the other thing to remember is if this is only about site plan applying if you don't subdivide. So if you do
Right.
subdivide, you have all of the subdivision
Right.
regulations on like how your streets need to be laid out and how your lots need to
Yeah.
be rectangular and all
This
of
is
these things.
multifamily housing.
Yeah, so the intention of allowing multiple structures from last year was to allow, again, some of this flexibility without having to subdivide on small lots. The commission chose 2 acres as a number that matched a lot of other standards in the regulations. And then chose to, for properties with non-residential, there's no cap on the number of structures. This is only for residential, that we have the 3 structures cap. So this is how you'd pull in some of that. So as I said, lighting, parking, trash, pedestrian, some of the pedestrian connection things are all in site plan and don't necessarily apply. So that's the thing that's a little tricky about this, is in my opinion, trying to not apply too much process and delay someone doing development. At the same time, making sure enough of the substance of our regulations that we want to apply still applies. And so that's for all of you to decide, not for me, as I sort of laid out the options in our staff opinion. But that, I think, is the core of it, is the balancing of applying the additional process and going to the DRB for potentially a couple of meetings, versus what do you get out of applying the site plan standards?
Right. I mean, I think, Michael probably, I think, if you're using 2 acres, I mean,
Or less.
8 units is not unreasonable.
I made it
You just hope that people use some intelligence, cause if there's no review at all, they're screwing it up from the very
well,
beginning
the-
if they don't
But
take
the
some
administrator-
basic considerations into.
But the standards don't come in until you actually do
Yeah.
the site plan. That's the part that's missing, I
Mhm.
think, cause
Yeah,
like we moved so many of our actual basic standards into the site plan review. I guess
Yeah.
I
my,
like your idea, the idea of like maybe there's in our higher districts, there's lower thresholds for review.
Mm.
But I guess I'm a little swayed by what Colin said, like, and for the 8 families or people, groups that are living there, I mean, if they do a bad job and there was no review and they didn't have to do our standards that we just worked on so much, like, and now there's like 8 groups living there, like, could really screw stuff up for them. I don't know. Okay.
Like,
Just
one
looking
other
at-
item, I guess, and I think Kelsey already alluded to this in the packet. It would feel weird if you had, say, 2 fourplexes, it was exempt from site review, but 1 8-plex wouldn't be. That does feel a little weird to me, because my understanding is the moment if you have a single unit, my understanding is you have a single structure, if it's
Mhm.
over 4, it's subject to site review.
Yes.
I guess whatever we do end up choosing, it feels like it should be consistent whether or not it has 1, 2, or 3 structures, like that cutoff number. It just feels if we think 2 fourplexes are exempt, then 1 8-plex should be exempt, or vice versa.
Yeah, and that actually, Colin, was part of the logic for saying anything above 4. Cause for the same like if you say you have 4 units in a single building, or 4 units that are in 2 duplexes, you likely have the same number of cars, you likely have the same number of people, give or take some. So is the impact of 2 duplexes on a site less than 1 fourplex or not?
I mean, what my personal guidance was losing density opportunities and reducing the amount of paperwork and time for somebody who wants to do this. We talked about flexibility when we were talking about this last time. That's were the factors for me. I'm not wedded to them, but that's why I
How
think
much extra cost is involved in going through that extra review?
It really depends, cause a lot of the things that people submit for site plan, they have to have drawn up anyway. So like the additional engineering costs or surveying costs or other things that are from other professionals is actually not much. Because we're asking for them to provide the information that generally they need to do to develop their site anyway. Where's the driveway, where's the parking, where's the trash, where's the lighting, all that sort of stuff. It can be a significant time delay. It could be a couple of DRB meetings and you might not get into a DRB meeting for a month or 2. So you could be, if you're in site plan, you could be delayed by 2 months or 4 months, fairly easily. We're not in that position right now, but say 2 years ago we were, where the DRB was full up for a few meetings in advance. So that can affect financing and some other things. I'm just sharing what I know about the costs.
time is money.
Yeah.
Right.
And then a few of the design elements that are a few of things in the site plan may require them to take a more expensive, layout or construction style or something else. have to do a nicer looking building, so it costs a little bit more, or might have to arrange their stormwater in a different way so that the parking is arranged the way it needs to be, or whatever it might be. There's some standards that may raise the actual construction cost. But I would say the application itself is not going to make or break one of these developments. Because for the most part, they're already doing the analysis and the mapping and writing up the site plan itself.
Did this question arise because of our discussions with developers, that they suggested that smaller developments would be exempted from site plan review?
So it currently is exempted from site plan review, and this particular question didn't come from a developer exactly. It came from our development review team reading our regulations and reading in one place, you know, a fourplex as a building type was exempt from site plan, and in another place, you could have 3 fourplexes on a site without having subdivision apply. And sort of connecting those 2 dots, they went, maybe that shouldn't quite be, you shouldn't be able to put 3 fourplexes on a site without site plan. And to Colin's point, but you would need it if you did a 12plex.
No,
Or if you had 3 4plex, or you'd have subdivision rules if you subdivide to 3 separate lots and put a fourplex on each of them, you'd have subdivision rules too.
You would have subdivision rules, you would not have site plan. Yep.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, because if you had 4 side-by-side duplexes,
Mhm,
let's say the footprint is about 3,000 square feet.
mhm.
On an acre, you still got, by the time you've given them some space around, you've still got 24,000 square feet or 19,000 for the required amenities and civic space and roads and parking and all the rest of it. So it didn't seem like it
Well, that was-
overdeveloped.
Well, that was part of the question too, is that it's not, because of this ambiguity between the 2 standards, it is not totally clear that site amenity would apply, because site amenity and civic space requirements live in subdivision and site plan.
Hmm.
And if neither subdivision nor site plan apply, then site amenities doesn't apply either.
But there's space for
Space,
whatever they want to do. They're still gonna
yes,
have
but
to.
like intentional space in the way that, condos in the 90s were built with just there's some grass in between the buildings. Like, yeah, there's some space, but it's not intentionally, the right size for a ball field or something else. Which is what we require now.
And I think that was kind of my point, like, we put all these things that we think are important for
Yes.
once you have more than a few units, we really want people to be doing things like that, so there is outdoor space. And if we're missing it,
At what point can something just be reviewed by staff and not have to go to the DRB for the site plan review?
I'm not sure, I don't wanna say the wrong thing, like I have a memory of it, but I don't.
Because it seems like that is, it kind of covers everything, but it's a lot faster.
Yeah,
Wouldn't
yeah,
this
there
replace?
is a
And then you
provision
could, then you could stay with the 2 acres.
There is a provision for administrative site plan, but I don't remember the exact standards for where that threshold is, and I just don't wanna
Right,
provide the wrong information.
so, I would think that
I was
perhaps
assuming
that would
that
be
it
a
would
solution.
require that administrative review.
Yeah, that the administrative
Mhm.
review instead of a
So
full
there's
site
2
plan
different,
review.
any home would require a zoning permit, which is administrative review.
Mhm.
There's also administrative site plan. So the site plan standards apply, but you don't go to the DRB. And then there's sort of full site plan that is DRB in the whole shebang.
Well, administrative site plan, that would maybe preclude, or take care of your fears that they do something crazy.
Right,
right, and it
Right,
sounds,
So
yeah,
why don't we,
but-
can we include that? It's required,
To be administrative?
administrative site plan,
Yeah,
after you've investigated it.
yeah, I'll double check. So I think the way to do it would be to set a threshold for here's where we want site plan to apply. And then make sure that it jives with the administrative site plan threshold, so that almost all of these kinds of applications would end up in administrative site plan, but you leave a little wiggle room for like the one-off crazy thing that's, we didn't even think about, that there is a little space for staff to kick it to the DRB if they feel like that's necessary.
Yeah, and this is 2 acres or less.
Yes.
Yeah, I would feel more comfortable because it sounded like you were thinking those standards would apply. But I think if we just said up to 8 was exempt, I think those standards wouldn't apply. Like, I'm not,
Yeah.
as long as the
Apply, but
standards
they-
apply and somebody's reviewing it,
Mhm.
I feel like, like you were saying, like up to 8 or something
Yeah,
seems
that's-
pretty reasonable, but
But-
how,
Well,
Let's then add that administrative site plan is required, because that's not very onerous, as I understand it.
So it's applying the same standards, it just happens at the, with our staff instead of the DRB.
Right.
It
So
would
it's-
happen quickly.
It generally happens more quickly. Staff is only really allowed to make decisions that are non-discretionary, or pretty, pretty close to non-discretionary. And, like if it says you need 6, all that staff can do is say you need 6. The DRB can say, oh, well, we can follow these modification standards and allow you to have 5 of whatever it is. So administrative site plan would only be if people went truly by the letter of the site plan standards and weren't asking for waivers and modifications and all of these
So
other.
it would
they
be
still
not
have
less
to-
onerous than actually having to.
Well,
The
it would
same
be.
standards would apply. They have no ability to grant sort of wiggle room around the standards.
No, I'm thinking of, for the applicant, would it,
Potentially less
wouldn't be
time.
less onerous than if they had to do the whole thing through the DRB?
But less time.
the time piece? that
Probably,
he
yes.
was describing?
Probably, yes. If they, I've just, from experience, I've seen applications come in, our development review staff see them and say like, ooh, this is 99% to the letter of the regulations, but there's this one thing, it's it's 6 inches too high, or it's, things like that, that they go back to the applicant and say, dear applicant, either you change this one thing and then we can grant you the site plan, or if you're really stuck on that one thing, you can go to the DRB and argue your case for waiver or modification. But at that point, it's up to the applicant to decide, is missing this standard worth it to me to go to the DRB? So in that perspective, I'm not concerned about an applicant because they have that choice. They could say, I will modify my plans to truly fit the regulations, or go to the DRB, and they can have that option either way.
Colin?
one quick mention. So we have subdivision standards. Which ones? I'm sure this is not a immediate like binary answer, but in terms of like site plan requirements versus subdivision requirements,
Yeah.
which ones are harder to meet? Because I guess I'm wondering if you have a situation where you have 2 fourplexes and we're requiring a site plan, will that mean that we'll just say, let's gonna subdivide instead to make that easier, or vice versa? Like are the site plan really easy and it'll mean that no one's ever actually gonna want to subdivide because it's way easier to create a site plan to go through a subdivision process.
Yeah, so it's not that one is easier or harder than the other. They're sort of, I think of it as being on different scales. So
Mhm.
subdivision is at the sort of higher level scale of laying out roads, laying out lots, like what is the circulation through the site look like? How does it attach to the main road, all of that, and where's the stormwater pond, things like that are all in subdivision. And then you go smaller and the details of which way are the parking stripes oriented in this particular lot, like where are the landscaping islands in the parking lot, where is the dumpster, sort of closer to a building or an individual site scale, those things are in site plan. So it's
Gotcha.
kind of subdivision is the layout of the whole thing in sort of roads and rec paths and lots and blocks and things like that. And then site plan is what are you doing on the individual site?
Got it. Yeah,
So
no,
it
that
really,
makes
it really
sense.
depends, like a
yeah.
wide open, for a wide open site, which we don't have a lot of in South Burlington, subdivision might be a piece of cake to meet. But then site plan is more complicated for, whatever reason. Where the opposite may be true on a strangely shaped lot or a lot that has weird access to a state highway or, something like that could makes subdivision very difficult. But then site plan is simple. It really is sort of a case by case about which one might be more difficult to meet.
Got it.
Do we have anything from the public?
Nobody wants to get in.
Right, is there any decision?
My leaning is to stick with over 4, if for no other reason than that is for consistency's sake. Like that's sort of, I hear the argument going higher, but I guess if I were to want to go higher than over 4, I'd want to change that for a multi, like a sixplex or something on a single building. Cause I don't like the idea of having separate standards depending on how the units are divided. That's my personal take. So I guess if we were to do 8, I would want to change it to also apply to 8 plexes, basically. That's currently where I stand on it.
I mean, yes, it's a valid fear that somebody could build an 8-plex. One building with 8 units, but you know, I'm worried that we will miss some opportunities in infill, particularly, where we have small lots. You know,
Well, I thought where we were going with this was that,
You 3 decide what you think. Tell me in like 2 minutes. We can get back to our farm discussion. Sorry.
because I thought perhaps we could just,
So we
You know,
can't actually discuss
Uh-oh.
without a
oh,
quorum,
right.
but you
Okay,
can,
I'll be
you
back.
can think.
We
deeply-
can think
you can
about.
think out loud.
No, you can think to yourself,
Think
Michael.
yourself.
Think in your own head. Colin can mute himself and think out loud if he wants to, but
So the core means that any decision would have to be unanimous here, because we only have 4 people.
yes.
Okay.
Well, but we don't have the answer to the question of administrative review versus site plan full review. Or I'm not site plan versus
Yeah.
versus site plan VRV review. Because that to me is what it comes down to.
Yeah, I pulled it up and I'm trying to see if there's an easy way to summarize it.
FBC,
Mhm.
outside of form-based.
This meeting actually should be out there,
I know. So,
you know, just out on
Out there
the,
tonight.
you know, the patio. I'm not suggesting, you know, margaritas or anything, just, you know, that everybody was out there.
You promised to bring the
door.
margarita. You told me outside you brought.
Yeah, right.
I'll suggest the margarita.
Can you open the door?
Yeah.
Would that mess with the air conditioning system?
Probably not.
There we go. Well done.
As long as there's no issue with the sound.
Or bugs. Oh, you've got a screen.
This
Cool.
little song.
Yeah. It's funny because I was, this isn't pertinent to the same, to the conversation, but I was reading about sound ordinances,
Mm,
I think is part of
Mhm.
this. And today there are a lot of sirens. A lot of sirens, and I started thinking, it's like, yeah, you go to other countries, you don't hear sirens a whole lot, you know, it's like, what's the difference?
Hmm.
Do they only use them when it's absolutely necessary, you know, versus using them all the time? What's the thing with sirens
Yeah,
around
no, since
here?
they fixed my hearing aids, the traffic noise that I'm now conscious of, which I didn't hear before because it's in a frequency that was
right,
not good for me. Now I hear this racket the whole time.
so just take it out, you'll be all set.
No, then I won't hear you.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
So we made a change.
Okay.
We opened the doors.
Yes.
But that's,
Sorry about
that's the
that.
only, that's the only change that has been.
Colin, let us know if the noise from outside ever causes that you can't hear us for some reason.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I can't notice the difference.
Okay, great. So, I did pull up the administrative site plan, review standards, and there's a bunch of different things. It is generally fairly minor, so we would, it would have to be rewritten a bit to allow, you'd have to allow this as a specific, exemption, a specific line would have to be added. It wouldn't fall under anything that is currently there. It's mostly now change of use, minor alterations, like you have a DRB site plan and there's small changes, then that can be administrative. It may be too discretionary for a whole sort of new set of buildings to be built under administrative site plan review. But it is something I can float to my colleagues as well. But I think, I mean, you would have to write it as a specific additional sort of
So,
authorized reason for administrative site plan.
Maybe on a trial basis or
so,
something.
but we're talking about DRB site plan exemption, but requiring administrative.
I think how you would write it, the best way to say it is that it would, at whatever threshold you all decide on, site plan is required, but then write into the administrative site plan that the administrative officer has the authority to grant, site plan approval for, and then you add another one for this
Yeah.
kind of thing. I would have to float
But
that
wouldn't you
past
say
our,
that it's required for this kind of thing? You have
It's
to have
allowed.
both.
Allowed, not required.
both of what?
Well, you've got to add it to the things that.
Yes, both pieces. You need it to both be in site plan as required, and then down the page, administrative site plan, the administrator has the authority to do this kind of site plan. That is something that I would have to, have the approval of our, city council, or city attorney. Because of that sort of where's the line on discretion in the site plan regulations and can they actually do that or not? So that's a little bit of a non-answer, unfortunately.
We still
No,
got to
it's-
settle on a
yeah.
number.
Takes
It's not more
further,
than X.
further investigation.
I will say that even DRB site plans, if they are reasonably straightforward, can be one meeting. It's just depending on the time of year and the year that you apply, that might be 2 weeks later. Minimum is probably a month later, given like review from staff and everything. And in some years that can be 3 or 4 months. But that's not currently the case. That was the case a couple years ago.
Good audience?
Question. This isn't why I came tonight. I'm just listening. But you've mentioned time, but obviously from the point of view of somebody that's building 8 or 12 apartment units, because that's what that would be without subdivision. Cost. And I didn't know how you got feedback of how much, I mean, you're making decisions that, will obviously affect the cost to a developer. I'm curious how you get information of how much it would cost. That's all. For the delay, the 4 months delay she mentions, plus any other expenses that went with it.
So this is a new thing from last year. So
Yeah.
like it's currently rolled back the cost quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I mentioned before, the sort of submission requirements is not much over and above what you would need to submit to actually have it constructed anyway. The cost of delay of the time that it would take to get the review depends on interest rates, it depends on your funding stack, there's all sorts of things that it depends how expensive the buildings you're building are, there's a lot of
I
variables.
understand. I was just curious from the planning commission's perspective, how they got that information other than
Well,
your estimate.
Well,
yeah, I think we get it in different ways. Sometimes we actually request it, like in this case, just the idea of exempting review, which is the idea, we're trying to say, okay, is there some type of review or threshold where we wouldn't need to have as much review? I think the idea is that it would be less cost. But you're right, like, I think what Michael's saying, okay, the difference between 4 and 8 you know, so we don't have a number,
And
you
it-
know, in this
it's
case.
anecdotal, we hear from developers, well, you know, it's really expensive to do all this, and it's time consuming,
Right.
so
And
we know it's an issue for them.
I didn't know if you brought in guests or something.
Sometimes we do, I think in this case, we were just thinking, okay, is there something we're comfortable with
Sure,
just
no, I understand.
reducing the
I
regulation?
wasn't asking you to account for me, I was just, wondering, suggesting.
But again, I think going back to, Michael's really valid point is saying that you can do 4 without the DRB review instead of 8, taking 4 units off the market that otherwise might have gotten built.
Yeah,
It's like,
I don't know.
You'd
I
like to
think-
think that
Is there a-
you'd like 4, you'd like those 4 more units or even 8 more units if it's not gonna be burdensome, but you don't want them to be built or designed or,
Is there a way we can
built in a less desirable way?
deal with Colin's fear that somebody will build an 8-unit?
Well, I think it's not only Con's fear, I think it's my fear too, like, I think the point of this item was to say, okay, let's kind of correct an inconsistency, we had changed it in one spot, but not another spot, and now it's vague. I really like what you were suggesting, I think, Michael, that idea of an administrative review, but it almost feels like another project, maybe not
Mhm.
project, maybe project is too big of a word, but like,
Another step.
it feels like if there's things that that are in site plan or now that we feel like are things that could go to an administrative review, it feels like we would wanna like think about that holistically and not just say, okay, well, this one
Right.
thing, let's just stick
Right.
it over an
Mhm.
administrative review.
Yeah.
And I think,
Like, I'd
you-
wanna understand like the implication of that.
and I think you do need the legal guidance of the city attorney to even know how much discretion, which is, the threshold is low for the amount of discretion that a administrative decision can include. But I'm not in a position to say exactly what that is.
And does the
And-
DRB wanna have a say
Right,
in that too? And
and-
that was actually my suggestion, that
Yeah.
it be an administrative review instead of
Okay,
a full
yeah.
DRB review.
And I think, Michael, I do also like the idea of having things that might vary over zoning district, but I also worry, and this is something Colin's brought up in the past, like if we lessen the review in the spot where there's expected to be higher density and maybe we don't require the site amenity, it's in the spot where we actually need the site amenity the most, like if we're talking about the high density.
Hmm.
I don't know, I guess I'm
Well-
kind of inclined to go with the 4 to just make it consistent, but some of these other things can maybe
Yeah.
be
Look, if the
really
DRB
important for.
staff figured that they had reasons to limit it to 4, I should respect that. But I need to just say what I was feeling.
No,
And
yeah.
It doesn't, it also doesn't mean necessarily that this is, it's a done project. It's just something that they've seen come in when people are starting to ask about taking advantage of the multiple structures provision, and then they say, well, can I build 2 more homes, or can I build 2 duplexes? And at some point, and this is where the development review staff were like, it's a policy decision where that line falls, but there's a line somewhere that between 1 unit and 12 units, that on a single lot, you'd need site plan for these other, traffic flow and dumpster, trash removal and all these things that come with sort of having that higher number of people on a single lot.
Well, can we say that it would be per acre? Cause I think the number 4 is great when you say 4 per acre. But I think 8 units on 2 acres is not dense. I mean, that's not dense at all.
8 units on 2 acres
I
leave.
mean, my whole neighborhood is denser than that. It's,
Yeah.
and it was built in 1990.
Yeah,
So
and
it's not asking much.
so my only hesitation is we've moved away from per acre,
Right. Oh,
you know,
right. Yeah.
dwelling units and other things, and it's sort of a,
Minimum
how,
lot size.
right, and how do those pieces fit
Yeah.
together if you suddenly have per acre
Right.
again?
Right.
But I hear what you're saying about,
So the number could be 8 if it's, but if it was 8 on 1 acre, that would be completely different.
but is it, I guess something, do you need different review of a parking lot that serves the same number of people? A developer's not going to make a driveway exceptionally long or a parking lot exceptionally large because those things are very expensive. So, you know, you might have a 2 acre lot, but your 2 fourplexes are going to be close together and probably pretty close to the road.
Right.
So whether they're on a 2 acre lot or on a half an acre lot, it may not actually make a ton of difference for how it's laid out for, you know, being able to get the trash truck in or whatever else.
Just for me, when I was thinking about this, to get an idea of what would be involved, if it's a 2 acre lot and you have 4 side-by-side duplexes,
Mhm.
obviously they're gonna be facing the road or close to the road. You're
Yeah.
still gonna have like 62,000 square feet behind them.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, the 2 acre threshold is big. Our intention with the 2 acres was that it matched some other standards about, you know, the carve out from needing a master plan and some other things that are other thresholds. We also wanted to make sure that we captured sort of strange sites. It's not 2 buildable acres necessarily. You know, there are some sites in the city that are 10 acres, but only have a half an acre of buildable land in the front that are right on the road. So to try to sort of catch the middle between those two things, like not go all the way up to 10 and allow people to have multiple structures on a 10 acre lot, but also not drop it all the way down to a half an acre, because then once you take out wetlands and you take out, right, you know, if there's a transmission line right of way or a, you know, something else, like you could end up with a very small space. Or the shape of the lot is weird, you
I mean,
know,
there's
it's complicated.
little lots, small lots on
Yeah.
San Remo, for
Oh, yeah.
example.
Okay, so I'm gonna make a motion that we go with number 3, require site plan review for any application with over 4 units.
I'll second it.
Any discussion on the motion?
Guess the only discussion I would make is that let's revisit it after there's actually a case.
That'd be good.
Yeah, I think it does sound like there's appetite for revisiting this. I think Michael does make some good points there.
Yeah, and all of you have actually. Okay, are we ready for a vote? Okay, all in favor?
Yeah.
All right.
I,
Okay, that was unanimous with Colin remote.
So technically speaking, cause Colin is online, you have to do a roll call vote.
Oh, we do.
Yeah.
Okay. Jessica, I.
Michael, I.
Donna Leben, I.
Colin, I,
Here we go. Thank you very much.
Did it.
Just for the record, when it's a split hybrid situation, make sure everybody knows who voted what.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, we are gonna move on to LDRs on number 6.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
you all are gonna hate me. Going back to the restroom.
All right.
That's okay.
That is,
Sorry.
oh,
Didn't do it.
that's right.
I'm also not fast.
That's fine. The restroom is close. So that's good.
Not to talk about anything in detail, but how do you want to go through this?
That is up to you all and Jessica. You can do it different ways. It's sliced in different ways.
Yeah, 'cause
We wrote it up sort of topically as what are the changes since the last time you saw a draft on a certain topic. That's the 1 through 6, and then the official map is number 7, I think. Yep. And then, or you could go article by article, because, so the tricky thing is like, Article 2 is definitions. It has changes that relate to both heights and uses and other things, so.
I think we should
Either
go,
way.
I think we should go one item at a time,
Hmm.
because there's one item that,
By topic.
yeah, you're gonna hate me for this. Everybody's gonna hate me for this, but
We can't say what it is. You gotta keep it as a surprise
Yeah.
until Jessica comes back.
yeah, there was like one section and I'm like, oh, doggone it. They still have those old, completely,
I'm not listening. I can't hear you.
It's not red line, too late.
well, it's not redlined, but I mean, it's complete gobbledygook. I mean, you know, the definition in there of certain things is totally meaningless.
I only have one in the definitions.
And I would have rewritten it today at home if I only had something that I could write and print on. Because I can't print right now because my old computer, my old desktop computer has died. So,
Too bad.
so I have
That
no,
makes life short.
so I have no way to write anything except on paper.
Oh dear.
It's very frustrating because I'm like,
My
you know.
wife is in the Northeast Kingdom right now, and we actually have no way to communicate, which is so unusual, you know? In other words, once you lose the things that you're used to.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You don't have like a spare typewriter, like in the back room somewhere that you just pull out?
I don't think I'd even remember how to use it. Yes, I do have. I have typewriters, but I don't think they have any ribbon on them still.
That's
It'd probably be
the thing,
hard finding the ribbon.
Yeah, it's like trying to make old stuff work. It's not easy.
If you want, I can give you the name of the typewriter repairing.
I had no desire to spend any money on those
Well, I
typewriters.
have
I
a-
sold one.
My-
Typewriter.
Grab
When
it.
I was little, I would like play in my parents' office and they had an electric typewriter. I would just sit there, just do, whatever, like,
It's so fun.
yeah, it was.
I've got an old
Great.
Selectric at home. If anybody wants to buy one and fix it and use it themselves.
Do you remember people used to
Did a
do
lot.
drawings with them?
Yeah.
Like if you did a certain character and then a bunch of spaces and then another character and then you went to the next one, you could draw like a dinosaur or whatever. 90s kids.
When I got away
So
from
we've
these
gone
guys.
far afield.
Oh, I am sorry,
We've got-
guys.
Yeah, we
we've
made
got
it to
something
electric
for
typewriters.
electric typewriters.
I was trying to be frugal and ate the remainder of a sandwich from Friday. It's been in the fridge, but like,
Oh, no.
I may need to,
A disagreeable.
I'm doing okay
sandwich.
so far, but I am so sorry. I'm
You need to go when you need to go.
very embarrassing.
Um,
Inconvenient.
While you were out, the question was, how do you want to do this? You want to do it section by section or person by person?
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so there's a few options.
Not person by person.
We
but
did
I didn't
sort of-
actually write any of my comments down.
Topics.
Let's do it. Well, so in here in the memo, can we do it by memo section? Like, so there's LER 2501,
Yeah.
minor and technical. So we'll kind of do it in by memo section.
Sure, that
So you're
is,
gonna have to pay attention how that relates to the LDR sections. So it's by topic, yes.
yep.
So the first one's the minor and technical
Could
amendments.
we get that on the screen by any?
Yeah. I will.
Hey,
I will
anybody
work-
got minor technical amendment items?
What about the definitions?
Yeah, where's the definitions like?
The definitions are everywhere. They're in minor, if you go by subject, so like these topics, the actual amendment numbers, then there will be different things that change in the definitions in multiple places. So I don't think there's any for minor and technical, but there is for heights, for supporting uses,
Yeah, we can
for,
always come back, like if we make it through and we
Oh,
haven't
right,
gotten them.
yeah, because
So-
this was basically,
Okay.
I wrote my comments based on this.
Oh,
so.
okay, good. Okay, so I'm not hearing any for the minor items. How about the calculation of heights?
That looked great,
I was pleased with the
Yeah.
definition changes. I
yeah,
Yeah.
that
I
was
know that
good.
was something we did.
do you want
Anything,
the topics shared? I just didn't know if I should be taking notes or. Cause I
I
have to
think-
log in on
I
this
think
computer.
now we're okay.
Yeah, I think,
The one item
It's
that's.
one
on the
section
thing
at a
I sent
time,
you
yeah.
is section 3-11, number 8. You'll find it, it's just, the word was missing.
Perfect.
I'm not gonna bring it up here.
Yep, I can always do that kind of typo thing.
Anything else on the calculation of heights? Or from the audience?
Nope.
Okay. The next one is the supporting uses in the industrial commercial areas.
I think that's fine, I'm here.
Okay.
okay.
Do we have anything from the commissioners on this one before we open up to the audience?
What section is it what number? Section 2?
Two.
Yeah, this is the one about whether or not
And
Yeah, so this is LDR 2503.
that's something not
The
in a
affected
hotel.
sections are generally Article 2, which is the definitions, and Appendix C. So is where
The
those,
use
the
table.
use table, new definitions that are in the use table, are attached to the use table, and where those uses are allowed in the zoning districts. Those are all in Appendix C.
Okay,
Appendix,
you're,
And the core of the changes are in the.
Appendix A, you're labeled Appendix C, but underneath it says Appendix A, but that's further down.
Okay.
okay, we have something from the audience on this
Well,
one.
it's I assumed you'd talk about it a bit, but, this had a little history with it, which was that Kelsey sent a letter to the Economic Development Committee back in December and asked us to opine about what to do about types of housing that might arise in IO district, basically industrial. well,
Mixed IC.
Industrial commercial district.
Yeah.
So we did, responded, and you have the letter, and I assume you've seen it. And we did some homework on it. And here we are. I read through what appears to be attached, which is accommodation is how it's characterized. And it's what you have here isn't obviously, it isn't like a regulation, it's some ideas which would be included in a regulation when it's drafted. But and I was surprised when I started to think about this. I had assumed this was the on-logic issue, and I had assumed it would require a draft of something very specific that would address their specific issues. And then I started to look through the regs as they existed and looked at long-term hotel extended stay and was like, boy, this is really close to what they need, except with a little, changing it. And I suggested those changes in our letter that would seem to free up and more directly address their issues, and I don't think is inconsistent with a hotel extended stay either, but that would be your call. Well, it's all your call, actually. And then, so I was a little surprised when I saw these, which is the accommodations discussion, because it's a discussion, but then you did scales with different square footages, apparently, that would apply. I'm not sure how they would, but I'm curious as to why you did that. I mean, I can't think of, it doesn't add value unless I'm misunderstanding something.
Well,
We have other-
if I remember the discussion, it really had to do with if you're gonna have, well, accommodation versus hotel, that it's a matter of scale and that you don't wanna have potentially hotel-sized buildings moving into an IC district.
Why not?
Because it might become a very popular place to put hotels, and then you no longer have room to build IC type structures.
Then you no longer, well, that's possible, except it's basically an industrial commercial district.
But it wouldn't be anymore if somebody started, if it became a place where people all of a sudden started building hotels.
On the flip side, what Don was saying as well, is I believe my understanding is our current regulations are trying to concentrate more of the hotel activity closer to city center to make it more of like kind of a hub of people and places and keep industrial more of a, industrial area. At least that's that was my recollection, is sort of both like, it was sort of both sides of that coin was my recollection of
this
how
is
we had to come to scale.
Ancillary.
To go
use.
back to what we did when we did our homework on this, this is not uncommon in industrial commercial areas. In fact, there's currently a extended stay hotel out in Williston that's being used by businesses locally, like, others, like PC Construction and OnLogic, when they need short-term people. It's not as convenient. It's not next to the business, which is of course why it's really valuable. And it's also a lot further from the airport, as is City Center. Unless you've got, is there somebody that wants to build a hotel in City Center right now? Or was that somebody was reaching out, or is this just theoretical?
Regulations are not written for right now, and
Oh,
they're
no, I
not
know, I
written
know.
for any single business or any single site.
No, I understand that. I'm not trying to be
No,
difficult.
you heard our discussion at the last meeting where we did talk about that.
Okay, I wasn't here.
You were here when we talked about
That was
this.
2 weeks-
It
that
was
was
two
2
meetings
meetings
ago,
ago,
that's right.
because
It-
that's
There was
when
a
I
meeting in
did that.
between. It was 2 meetings ago,
Okay.
how we,
I just don't know, I mean, what I had suggested was couple of simple changes that seemed to work, and it's, I'm not sure that
So as a
the
piece,
scales add value unless you really wanna delve and find out what would be the right size by
So-
talking to the businesses who are maybe considering doing it.
so we did do that. And this is part of a much larger project of consolidating commercial uses.
Yeah.
There are currently in the regulations, bed and breakfast, hotel, and extended stay hotel.
Yeah.
With the advent of modern hoteling and with the changes of amenities that are offered in different places and different things, those 3 categories have been generally collapsed. If you talk to anyone in the hotel industry, the difference between an extended stay hotel and a regular hotel is no longer a valid distinction. Many hotels have a kitchenette and many extended stay hotels are more like apartments and therefore should be classified as temporary housing. When we were working on this project of consolidating the commercial uses, which is actually the next topic in the list of things. Something that we did was consolidate everything that would be considered sort of temporary accommodation, not a residence, someone who is not going to be living there. And the idea was both sides of the coin, we could consolidate something to truly reflect what the impact of it is on other people, other properties around it, on the community, with traffic, with lighting, with 24-hour access, with all these things. But then also divide by scale to then allow more commercial uses in some of our lowest density neighborhoods. So when we wouldn't want a hotel in some of our lower density neighborhoods, we may want something that is a bed and breakfast boutique hotel scale. So that's the low scale. That was the easy one to chop off, is do a category and a scale instead of artificially defining between bed and breakfast, hotel, and extended stay hotel. So keeping extended stay hotel was not on the table. That was not part of the project because of the other work we were doing on commercial uses. With the conversation about hotels in the mixed IC, there's a difference between the economic development goals and the planning goals of the city. Yes, hotels we've recognized are an aspect of a modern business park. No, you don't need to have a full-size 200-room Holiday Inn to accomplish those goals. So that's how we drafted this, is that you could have hoteling that is connected to another business and that is limited to a certain size to have those things match the actual needs of an actual business in Tech Park and the greater mixed IC area without having to change zoning districts, without having to change and allow any large scale hotel, because as everybody knows, like that is also close to the airport. So it's, as Donna said, an attractive site for regular hotels, which then changes the relationship of the hotel to the function of the business park and takes away, what we're looking at is takes away some of the sites that are currently available for more industrial uses, more trucking uses, more 24-hour uses, things that would be disruptive to people who are living or temporarily living in a hotel area. So this is what we ended up drafting from the staff perspective, is a limitation on size and a limitation on having the accommodation only be able to be accessory to a large commercial use otherwise, because then you couldn't have a standalone hotel on its own lot that's run by,
Holiday Inn.
IHG Group or somebody else. You may have a hotel management that comes in or that manages a smaller hotel, but it is not attractive to sort of the vertical, very small to very expensive or very large and very expensive hotel portfolio groups.
Thank you for the explanation.
Yeah.
Welcome.
how did you come up with, so I'm not sure how the scales,
Yeah,
as you have three scales here.
Yep.
How does,
So
how do you
the-
plan to implement that?
yeah, so that the scales are divided, and if you look in the rest of Appendix C, the different scales are allowed in different zoning districts. So accommodations small would be allowed in more zoning districts, in sort of smaller, more neighborhood scale zoning districts. Accommodations large would be allowed in our densest areas, in our densest mixed use areas, I would say. And accommodations medium would be allowed in effectively mixed IC to allow for that kind of business associated small hotel use to go into Tech Park without it opening the door to all these other things.
How did you come up with 60?
60 was through a review of sort of average number of hotel rooms in some hotels that in the greater Boston area, sort of the ring around Boston, that's a lot of sort of technology parks and other things. Austin, Texas area, same thing, has sort of a ring of these larger sort of technology businesses. Which, one of the cities in Arizona, Phoenix or Tucson, Arizona, Scottsdale, potentially, Arizona. Similar things, has these sort of technology areas. And the hotels that are more geared towards sort of a medium size in sort of visual impact and are geared for kind of a more extended stay experience tend to have fewer rooms.
Yeah.
And that number is more around, we saw some that were 65, we saw some that were 48, things like that. We landed on 60 as a reasonable number. That's certainly something that is up to the commission to sort of adjust. But what we didn't want to do is, you see, the big hotels in other cities, like the airport hotels near Logan Airport or something, will have 160.
Yeah.
So there's a line there, and we landed on 60 through our review of similar business-oriented hotels in other similar settings.
Was this all clear to you previously?
Yeah, cause
Yeah,
we had a whole
okay.
nother meeting where where we were really reviewing the
I was-
consolidation,
This part.
the consolidation of uses. So we kind of looked at the range and what things would fall into different categories, so.
Yeah, and some of this was clarified. Earlier meetings were a little higher conceptual level, like what did the planning commission want us to look into further, and where
Yeah.
did they want us to land on some numbers, or like how to allow certain types of hotels but not make it into a whole field of hotels. And this is the recommendation that staff landed on.
And we're still in draft form too,
Yeah.
so if 60 doesn't seem right. We have someone joining us online, Michael B.
Yama?
Sorry, I can't see well.
Good evening. My name is Michael Bayama. I represent Technology Park Partners. They're the original developers of Technology Park, and I'm also the president of Technology Park Community Association. I greatly appreciate the work that the Planning Commission does to help guide development in our city. And I really appreciate Kelsey's comments in terms of helping us understand a little bit how the scales came to be. That was one of the reasons I wanted to attend today's meeting, is to try to understand what the parameters were for how the scales were set up. It seems to me, at least in my limited understanding of master planning and zoning regs, that a use is either permitted or not, and then its impacts are assessed in other ways via impact fees or wastewater fees, right? So it didn't make sense to me exactly why a consumer-facing business of small and medium size would be permitted in a zoning district, but not large, right? If the dimensional standards are appropriate and the lot is big enough, why couldn't you have a large-scale business there of the same type if it's permitted? So I think I understand how the staff came up with this based on trying to expand uses in certain districts where maybe a smaller size is appropriate, where they otherwise would not be permitted. But I think a little bit more consideration in this regard to the scales would be appropriate. I do think that looking at some of the sizes here, particularly, as I was looking at this, consumer-facing commercial, I'm obviously specifically focused on IC because of who I represent. But, you know, the square footage is small, less than 5,000, medium, 5 to 10,000, large is over 10,000. I have numerous businesses in our large building at Tech Park that are over 10,000 square feet. And I think that as it stands now, some of our existing uses in the large building may not be permitted under the changes to these regs as it stands today. So I think a little bit more consideration and discussion around the scale and what the purpose is of the scale would be very, very valuable. And that's sort of all I have at this point.
Yeah, Michael, I have a question about that, just to make sure, you know, I think there's the different categories, so the consumer, so you're specifically thinking the consumer facing commercial. Cause, you know, I think we were thinking those would be the kinds of businesses where you'd have a lot of people, like visitors and people coming to buy things, and I think in my head, and maybe I'm just not thinking about it right, but that doesn't necessarily, at least what I think of as a technology park or an industrial park, I don't necessarily think of like a storefront. There might be a lot of employees or maybe people coming for different things, but not, I guess I'm not thinking about like a.
Yep. So
consumer
530
facing.
Community Drive presently has Planet Fitness. It also has Kid Logic Learning. And I would describe those as more consumer facing.
Childcare is sorry to interrupt, but just to make sure that, you know, the childcare is completely separate from this
Yep.
system, because we're intentionally allowing childcare in almost every district, for exactly that reason, both being closer to employers, but also closer to employees' homes and, you know, whatever works for people. So just FYI, the childcare is a completely separate use.
And then what about the fitness? Like how does, just to make sure we're.
Yeah,
'cause
so
it
fitness
does
would be-
feel like
It would be
fitness-
considered consumer facing, commercial.
Same,
Michael,
same
do you know off the top of your head how many?
Catamount pickleball is another, we had a pickleball court permitted in there, currently 15,000 square feet. So,
Mhm.
you know, if the sizes of those units change and we need to pursue a change of use, you know, could that be a problem based on the current scale? I just was,
So how big, do you know off the top of your head how big Planet Fitness is?
yeah, 10,500 square feet.
Sure. Perfect.
There's always one.
There's always one, yeah. Cause as on top of what Jessica said, and I'll bow out a little bit, but the intention was that what we don't want is for something like a large consumer draw. Like at one point, there was a proposal for a BJ's Warehouse Club kind of store, like large store like that to go into a tech park development plane. So that's what we were intending for, you know, maybe not even that big, but sort of large retailers that draw people to the area. Like if Target relocated from the mall and actually wanted to go in their sort of traditional size, it's much larger than what is in the mall currently. We don't want that area to shift from being sort of manufacturing, office park, technology development area to kind of a retail area like we see in a lot of places. You know, Massachusetts comes to mind, like Burlington, Massachusetts just has, you know, acres and acres and acres of sort of big box stores and mall type businesses. So that's what we're trying to not allow here, but then also allow the smaller uses, like hypothetically Planet Fitness was 9,800 square feet, that would be great. But also, you know, the deli or the hair salon or something that would serve the employees that work in that area without being a draw for people from outside of the park. So if you're saying that the number should go up to 20,000, or if there should be an extra large size, like I think that's all great feedback. And yeah, I don't know if the
Right,
commission
because
had
we
other thoughts.
definitely want like those businesses to have childcare, which would be allowed, and
Yeah.
fitness, which is important. So, you know, just thinking about like what the
What the right
size,
number is.
what the right number is, and that's why we're doing this. That's
Mhm.
why,
Yep.
yeah, it's great you're you're here.
And that's why I kind of wanted to come and just give you some feedback.
Right, so we'll
Yeah,
consider it, 'cause yeah, Colin, do you wanna?
yeah, no, I'm just definitely saying, yeah, I'd be amenable to tweak. I'd also just be amenable to tweaking that 10,000 number. I mean, I agree with Kelsey. I don't want to. Yeah, we don't want Walmart there, but like there may be a middle ground between that and 10,000.
I know Ashley had, or I guess, sorry, Michael, was that it? I don't wanna cut you off.
Yeah, I think that's it for this section. I have a couple other little things on as we move on.
Great, Ashley, you had your hand up, and then we'll go to Tim after.
Yes, I just wasn't sure where we were on the agenda, but I'll be commenting on a later section.
Great, Tim?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So just a general statement. I mean, you know, that the state has sort of edicted that we allow ADUs where possible in residential areas. I was just thinking about the concept of an accessory commercial dwelling unit to sort of possibly be a middle ground to satisfy, you know, those industrial parks where there are commercial buildings where they want to have some kind of a housing attachment to it. So that was just the concept in my mind, an accessory commercial dwelling unit of a small scale that's, you know, close by to whatever the primary business unit is. I don't know, you know, it's just an off the wall idea. Thank you.
Not off the wall.
Kind of where this all started.
Yeah, I think that is similar to how it landed, because it's an accessory. Yeah, so I think we're doing that, Tim.
No, it's not permanent
good
residence.
idea.
It's like an accommodation, not a permanent one, correct?
Yeah, not a living
Right,
unit, but
just to,
accommodation.
just to go to sort of recover the background on that is we landed on sort of some direction from stakeholders and legal counsel and other places where allowing housing, even a few units of housing, could result in some significant issues in the future for, you know, even if there's one apartment and then someone wants to develop something next door that is a manufacturing business or is a business with a lot of trucking that requires 24-hour operation, you know, you can have a lot of arguments about things that are incompatible with housing, even if it's only one unit of housing. The same with requiring housing to only be rented to employees of a business, of that business, brings up a whole can of worms of landlord-tenant issues. And what if the person quits their job? Can you evict them or not? Or there's all sorts of stuff. So this is how we sort of landed, and just wanted to re-highlight those couple of things.
Okay, anything else on this section? Oh,
Great. Thanks for your homework, Kelsey.
Thank you, John.
very good, thank you. So we'll move on to 25-4, which is consolidation of uses / update to table of uses. So this is a table of uses in Appendix C. Anything on this one? We have talked about this one pretty in depth. Ashley, you wanna go ahead?
Hi, thank you very much. I'm commenting to support some written comments that I had submitted last week to Kelsey Peterson in supporting of the permitted use in the transportation overlay for the mixed IC, which I see was restored in the table. But I don't see that it has been restored in the table in the industrial open section, which includes Tilly Drive, which is highly medical. And just wanted to see if that was an oversight or if there is a reason for that being excluded in the update.
No particular reason for it to be excluded in the update. As from staff perspective, am fine with including it as permitted, which she says that TO is permitted in the transit overlay district. That is in line with what it's currently allowed as. You can't sort of have it everywhere in the industrial open space district, which you can in our transit overlay district, which is closer to roads and defined by our GMT routes. So that is, I think, something that is fine. It's something that hinges a little bit on the continued survival of GMT and different bus lines and bus services, but as of now, it is mapped where it has been for the last 5 or so years at minimum.
So if we were gonna,
Oh, and just as a policy reasoning, the idea was that medical facilities and other social services kinds of facilities need to be accessible to people and not just for people with cars. So allowing it sort of deep in the IO where you would need a car is, especially for a medical procedure, or appointment, is counter to our planning goals, but allowing it within the transit overlay district is.
did you have something else, Ashley, you wanted to say before we talk about it?
I just want to point out, if it's not aware to the commission members, we do offer, UVM Medical Center does provide a scheduled bus service from the downtown transit center to Tilly Drive and other clinics on Heinsberg Road, in hopes that someday GMT service would keep going there. So in a sense, it is still on the traffic overlay with our support in filling the gap until GMT is more expansive or able to expand more. Just wanted to make sure the commission was aware of that.
Thank you, Ashley, that's very helpful.
What-
Oh, go ahead, Colin.
On that note, would we consider perhaps adding those services to the transit overlay zone? Would that accomplish our goals in the most kind of, but without opening everything up without that service?
I think that is some of the reasoning for why we haven't changed the transit overlay map in that area. Currently, the only bus service that goes down Heinsberg Road is like a twice-a-day commuter, so it's not really effective
Mhm.
for sort of bus service to some of the sites that Ashley is mentioning. But I think that I can't speak for some of the history of it, because it was before my time with the city, but my understanding is that that is part of the reasoning for not changing the transit overlay district when the bus lines changed in that area, is because UVM is providing sort of that private in a, non-public transit way.
Just to point out too, anybody can ride that bus. You don't need to show
Yeah.
that you need that you have an appointment. We stop at every building on Tilly Drive, and we stop at 2 buildings along Heinsberg Road, the Eye Laser and the Sphinx building. So and anybody can ride at any time, and they're scheduled. It's a scheduled service that's published.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. That's what I was inartfully trying to say, is that it's taking the place of public bus service for that area.
So Kelsey, what would be the procedure for us to say, yes, we want to make this change to the draft? Because we have a draft.
Yep. You can tell me to do that, and then at the point, if we got to the point that you could warn a hearing today, then you would just say with the edits as discussed. You would have to do a vote on the individual edits. Or we have built into the schedule that you can kick the actual warning of a hearing to the first meeting in June. It does move the schedule out by another 2 weeks, but it's fine.
Okay, is there general agreement to make this edit to go into the draft? A straw poll, thumbs up? Okay. I think we like the idea of putting it in the draft. Is that enough for?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.
I saw the hand up here and then, okay, Michael?
While we're proposing edits, tying into the comment I had before, consumer facing commercial on here on the table for IC is not permitted. And so I don't, this just reflects my same comment before. So
C
don't
or
know.
IO?
A mixed IC, sorry, did I misspeak? Sorry about that.
No, I'm just trying to mix IC.
Consumer facing commercial, the large is not permitted.
Correct.
Maybe that's just a change to the definition of what large is.
Yeah, so my response would be like that was intentional, as I said, to prevent sort of the large retailers, the other things like that from going into that area, because that's not the intended use of the area. And it would also, in our opinion, changes some of the valuation of the area and makes it, less appealing to some other things. And I think your prior comment about changing the threshold for large, that would be the staff recommendation, is to tweak the threshold and then still not allow large consumer facing commercial in the area, but maybe move the number up a little bit.
What do you, do you think, Colin, I know you commented that you support that idea. I don't know what that number would be. Would you say 11,000, so Planet Fitness is in, or do we
Right.
what's the way to make that kind of a tweak?
Yeah. So the number 10,000 comes from looking at other cities, especially in the Northeast, where things tend to be a little bit of a smaller scale than, Colorado or Utah or Texas or California. Looking at Portland, Maine, South Portland, Providence, Rhode Island, places like that are clearly larger than us, but not they're sort of still New England scale places. 10,000 was a pretty reasonable size. It's a hard one because other communities use more use categories, but 10,000 was a pretty common cutoff between scales of retail, scales of grocery stores, between a Trader Joe's and a Hannaford's, that's sort of where that number falls, is between those two things. Gyms are a little bit difficult because they can be a little bit bigger, but they can also be quite smaller. They can be smaller if they're sort of studio based. Like a Pilates facility can be 3,000 square feet and be functional. So we saw a lot of 10,000s. But then also 10,000 is a pretty big restaurant. So some of those it's kind of hard to thread the needle on that.
Do you think fitness just maybe doesn't fit in consumer facing commercial? Would it be in a different category? Potentially?
It kind of is, because, it's a type of facility where, the same people use it repeatedly, as opposed to, most retail
store.
spaces that are more occasional.
Would we consider, what about I don't like the idea of adding more categories because the whole point is trying to reduce the categories. What would happen if we say moved consumer first commercial, so move the gym from consumer based commercial to general commercial? Is that a specific concern?
So the one thing with that, and I did consider that, and one thing was general commercial is not allowed in some of the smaller scale places.
Oh, because
so you couldn't have a yoga studio by scale. You couldn't have a small, a yoga studio in the Orchards or something, where now you kind of could, you could, with all the other restrictions of LNC.
Actually, that makes an interesting example though, because the Edge Sports and Fitness is in MSM, and that is that was
think the
40,000
Edge is
square
in-
foot plus.
Which Edge?
Oh, sorry, the one on Grandview,
Oh, yeah.
or Twinos, whatever, because that was 40,000. That's huge, but it's in medium scale.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's indoor tennis courts, which is very, very big.
So what I'm hearing is maybe indoor recreation is closer to general commercial than to consumer facing commercial.
Indoor recreation.
Maybe, but then as we just said, that general isn't allowed in MS. M? Or rather, I basically trying to think, is there a use table in which the current large tennis courts in MSN
Mhm.
is permitted? Because under this current one, like that's not 11,000, that's like 40,000.
It's like the
Uh,
Planet Fitness and Tech Park. I mean, they both
Yeah.
seem like reasonable things to continue to allow, and
Yeah.
not make it.
No, yeah, no, they will be continued allowed, correct? I mean, they'll all be grandfathered in. This only is to do with if they want to expand, correct?
Yeah, Yes.
Yeah.
Michael, while you're here, I'm curious talking to you if you saw a commercial space and it was a gym, would you expect it to, and say someone comes in and they say they want to change it from a gym, would it be more likely to go to like a small manufacturer or an office or something like more that direction in commercial? Or is it more likely to go over and turn into a restaurant or a different store or something like that? Like, that's how I'm trying to parse the thing, is part of the reason for this consolidation is to reduce the number of site plan amendments that are needed for changes of use. So if you have a space that is suited to a gym, is it more suited to switch over to something that's general commercial, or more suited to switch over to something that's other consumer facing uses?
It's a difficult question to
Yeah.
answer. You know, usually the number one driver is economics. But I would say that when it comes to a gym, one of the most difficult things to accommodate typically is parking. It's a very parking intensive use.
Yeah, and that was our reason, original rationale is like, yeah, maybe it's the same people, but you could have 50 cars parked, at 7 AM to do their before work or at 5 PM or whatever it is, like it's a high traffic.
Yeah.
So as an impact on the sort of businesses around it, it can be a very high, the scale of it, depending on the scale, can be a very high demand use that is more similar to something like a store
Yeah.
than to, a small manufacturer.
It's also something that, if you're gonna combine uses, you'd like to have retail and gyms close to each other, because the two are, they can be pretty compatible.
Mhm.
And you go to the gym, run and catch,
So
get some groceries before you go home afterwards, that sort of thing.
this may or may not be helpful. This may be complicating things. But something that we did in this draft for warehousing is made small warehousing, sort of, that serves one business that is under a certain number of square feet, fall into one category, and large warehousing fall into another. It's not as clean, but I'm wondering if it's something where a smaller scale facility falls into consumer facing commercial, because like the number of humans per square foot is going to be higher for like a Planet Fitness than it is for an Edge. The Edge is, if it's 40,000 square feet, but it's all tennis courts, there's only 2 or 4 people on each tennis court. So maybe large indoor recreation like the Edge falls into general commercial, and smaller under a certain threshold is consumer facing, just thinking of the scales of things that
Like
kind of
kind of separating like a yoga studio
Yeah.
from a
Yeah.
larger fitness.
Yeah, or
indoor-
an Orange Theory is different from the YMCA.
That, yeah, if the Y is different from, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Well, hey, why would the Orange Theory be different than the Y? Aren't they both pretty parking intensive uses?
I'm saying, so the larger you get in a gym space, in a gym building, the more like you are to have large facilities that allow fewer people per like square foot of the facility. Like an Orange Theory is a pretty high like humans per square foot use, because there's so many machines, like machine right next to each other. Where something like the Y or the Edge, they have a big pool and they have big tennis courts, and there's only a few people using each tennis court, and so like the scale of the building is outsized for the number of humans that are using it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one. I mean, to harp on this whole edge thing, for example, the edge over on Joy Drive recently
Right.
converted two of their tennis courts into a like gym space. So now their parking
Yep.
demands have just jumped up considerably. I don't know how that impacts that thing, but it's definitely a
Right, so
weird
that's
case.
tricky.
Yeah. Huh.
Well, they have more parking there, I think. I think it's one of the reasons they moved it.
So Kelsey, I'm gonna throw something out here that probably is gonna be unhelpful, but
I do it every day.
I've seen in other markets, this isn't the only market in which I've done this, that, you know, there will be uses permitted in a certain district, but in order to obtain a certificate of occupancy for a specific type of use in that district, the property has to have a certain number of parking spaces. And each use has a required number of parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross area. And so if you have a building, you know, in the IC district, right, where indoor recreation is permitted, but the building is 20,000 square feet and it only has 20 parking spaces, one parking space per 1,000, it's not enough to accommodate a gym, as is defined under a certificate of occupancy requirement. And so the use would not be allowed in that building, not because it's not located in the right district, but because it doesn't have the requirements necessary to facilitate that use. Does that make sense?
Let me push back on that one, because, you know, if you have a lot of different uses in one location, not all of them are gonna use parking at the same times of day. So, I mean, I think generally parking regulations accept that. You don't have to have, you know, exclusive number of parking spaces for each use.
And we actually moved away from minimum parking.
I know, that's why I was gonna throw a big one.
Yeah.
Right.
It feels like that's less of an issue now than it
Yeah,
used to
probably
be.
not.
Yeah. Anyway, never
Yeah.
mind, forget I said anything.
Should we, I guess I don't know, so you'll maybe think about how to separate those?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to know from the commission if there's if what you're thinking is there's a scale of indoor recreation that becomes different from a gym. That it's, you know, goes to indoor recreation as opposed to a fitness facility. And I know those are just, it's semantics, but trying to think of how to define, you know, a spin studio or a yoga studio or a Orange Theory or a Planet Fitness.
It starts
Under
when
a
you
certain-
have courts, you know, any kind
It
of
is.
courts, basketball courts,
Indoor
tennis
fields,
courts,
indoor
pickleball,
soccer, what?
Tracks.
Cool.
A pool, a track. There are
bowling.
Donna, get out of here with your bowling. Yeah, so I think there's, if that's sort of the commission's thought, that there's a scale at which, or is it the sort of the large facilities like courts or something, like, is that generally a thought that you'd like me to pursue, that a fitness center that someone goes to and just runs on a treadmill and does something is different from maybe a place that has those facilities, but then also a basketball court or a track and a pool and a tennis court or whatever, like a large facility, either whether defined as square footage cut off between the two things or the facilities in one versus the other, like to be I'm just throwing something out, but to be a fitness center that falls into consumer facing commercial, you can't have a tennis court, a pool, like those facilities,
You
or,
couldn't exclude a pool because that's used for therapy.
but it's the scale, right? It's the scale of those things.
That would be therapy.
Well, the edge down in Farrell has a pool,
Mhm.
but they have all the other stuff as well, and they use the pool for fitness training.
Right, but the pool does sort of kick up the scale of the whole building by a certain amount. So either it's square footage, you know, over 20,000 square feet is a different thing, or is it, you know, facilities for pool, court, sports, something else that kicks it over? Like, is that something that you'd like me to pursue? Is like, are there two versions of indoor fitness and activity related uses that may fall into different categories in the.
And I
in
think
the-
there's a middle ground that might actually fall into both. Like some of those middle size ones
Mhm.
might actually be okay as a like,
You could be the largest consumer
Yeah.
facing commercial or the smallest general commercial, and it
like
doesn't make a
something like
difference.
this Planet Fitness that he's talking about might actually fall into either category and therefore would be allowed in more locations.
Mhm.
Does that
But
Colin?
just to check on, so just to be clear, we're zeroing in the Planet Fitness. Michael, were there, is it just the Planet Fitness that's the ish that will be a grandfathered in structure with these two regulations, or are there other businesses that you're also concerned about? So make sure we're not tunnel visioning on one issue with this. There's
Yeah, there's
potential.
Catamount Pickleball is the other one.
Oh, so another fitness.
Although they're not open right now, they recently closed, but it's possible that another operator comes along and wants to open that facility. Right now, that space is permitted for indoor recreation. It's roughly 16,000 square feet.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I am happy to.
Yeah, and I guess in my mind, I was thinking an indoor, this kind of a place could be okay in an industrial park. It feels a little more industrial.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of a big warehousey
This-
type of a
Right, the
thing.
scale of the building is a big warehousey thing. Yep.
They usually are out there, yeah, for that
It's
reason.
indoor recreation and fitness.
Great. Anything else on this item?
I think I have a comment, but I was looking for some clarity about what was approved after Ashley spoke. You guys took
To-
either a straw poll
To
or-
change the medical and social services to be a P-TO in the industrial open space district. So the industrial
I
open,
couldn't find those charts in the agendas, so could you?
yeah, it's in appendix C.
I can't
Oh.
find that from the agenda for this meeting, so.
I'm seeing it on page 282, I think.
Yeah, of the consolidated, yeah.
Do you have a page 282?
No, it's not gonna load that fast. But so it's changing from what as currently stated to what?
So as currently stated, medical and social services is not listed as allowed in the industrial open space district. But currently in the regulations, the medical office, medical facility are allowed, they're permitted in the transit overlay. So you have the industrial open space and then you have the transit overlay that's on Tilly Drive and close to Heinsberg Road. You could have a medical office only in those pieces in the IO. Other places in the city as well, but only in the transit overlay in the IO, not like deep in Meadowland.
So it's essentially like keeping the status quo in that spot, because right now it is allowed and
Yeah.
the way the chart was written, it would have no longer been allowed.
It would have
So
made
kind
all
of-
of UVM's medical facilities on Tilly Drive non-conforming, which was not what we intended.
And yeah, I think we just missed it.
But this isn't going to open it up to more places.
It is just where, it is where it is currently allowed,
In the
Just-
transit overlay.
in the transit overlay. So there are places in the transit overlay district overlay in IO where there are currently not medical facilities. There's other things in those areas. So hypothetically, you could have something turn over into a medical facility, but it doesn't expand the area where a medical facility is allowed compared to our current regulations.
Personally, I would love to see the space retracted for those facilities to get them more into the core and less going down Heinsberg Road. I think long-term that would be much preferential. I understand your short-term concern about making something non-conforming, but I do think the original way it was proposed feels to me much more the long-term planning route.
I don't think we originally proposed that. I think we had a typo in the table. We missed it. Is what I think. But you're saying you would like us to make a planning change, which I hear.
Yeah, maybe it was a typo. I just thought getting it more constricted out of that entire zoning area.
So
Would be better.
The thing that's difficult, I think I would tend to agree that we, you know, if we were looking at this minute at changing the transit overlay itself, I would probably advocate for it to stop at the highway. And because, you know, there's sort of, it's one of those ship has sailed situations for Tilly Drive is all medical facilities, and that's not something that's gonna turn over.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, for this conversation of consolidating the uses, this is maintaining the status quo, and that's an additional planning and policy conversation that can be had in the future.
Thank you. I'm making it.
Okay, anything else on this item?
I mean, appendix C kind of occurs in a whole bunch of places. This item that I had, it's not even related to anything we've been talking about. I just kind of was reading through in, you know, where you had each of the bullets.
Yeah.
Or each, you know, I was just reading through it and realized that we had something that was old information in there that was incorrect. And I just wanted to
Which is
have,
what?
it was
Happy to hear.
appendix C, sections A9 and A10. They're actually inaccurate definitions. One
Is
of
that an
glare,
appendix C or an appendix A?
it was under uses and dimensional standards in
Oh, okay.
appendix C.
Yep.
And it was listed as A9 and A10. And it's just kind of awkward because people define glare inaccurately a lot. And they use the wrong measurements for it. And while it may work for planners who don't really understand what those terms mean, it drives people who are trying to follow the standards crazy because it doesn't mean anything. You know, it's like you kind of think I know what they're trying to say, but that's not what it says. It's one of those things. And I thought, well, if we're not gonna carry these through tonight into
Yeah, I think given our conversation about fitness centers and things, that is
yeah,
not.
there's enough other changes
yeah.
happening, that one of the things I'd really like to do is to, you know, really take some time to offer a corrected definition of things like direct glare and, you know, just
Why
put
don't-
it in there in a way that's understandable,
If
but
you
also
can
that makes
send
sense.
me a succinct, a concise definition that you would like to have replaced in there,
Yeah,
I'm happy
yeah.
to provide that in the next packet.
Yeah. that's
And
what I
also
wanted
sort
to
of
do.
circulate it through development review staff and through our sort of civil engineering people who are in DPW, like, you know, people who know the technical things. more
Yeah,
than me.
cause it would be good for the IESNA definition,
When would
even though
you-
it's a little complicated. So making it simple for everybody to understand, but using the correct terminology,
If
that's
you
all
I think
I,
it sounds great.
all I
So
really
when
wanna
would you
do.
need that from Donna?
If you could send that to me by Friday,
okay,
that would be great, because the packet for the next meeting will go out on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Next Wednesday.
yeah, that's
Like not tomorrow.
doable.
Perfect. Good catch. Okay.
Yeah, there's like two lines in there and it'd be just nice that since we're making corrections anyway to
Mhm.
correct that. There's other things in other parts of the ordinances that have similar problems, but let's just try to fix them as we get to them.
Okay, 2505, updates to city center form-based code.
Or I do have one other very minor one. I think they would fall on it. Just I do with childcare. I noticed so in the definition section we have stricken our barely like our own definition of childcare facility
Mhm.
to just defining it based on state statute.
Yep.
And in section 3-14, there's a lot of additional language about exactly where childcare can and can't go, and it references other statutes, and that wasn't touched at all. Should there have been any change to 3-14, or does changing our definition of childcare not impact Article 3, section 14?
So, our definition was almost identical to the state statutes anyway. It just wrote it in a sort of more complicated and slightly unnecessary way.
Okay,
It used a lot of the same terms, sort of those sub-terms, family childcare, home, things like that are all used in state statute. I consider it to be best practice to, if you mean something that is regulated by the state like that, like childcare is licensed and regulated tightly by the state, and you know, they have whole divisions of people who are doing that work. Tying our definitions to the state definitions is best practice.
yeah, no,
I did look at
absolutely
I
agree.
did look at 314 and I didn't see any conflict, but I'm happy, considering that we're kicking this to the next meeting for warning, I'm for other reasons, I'm happy to
No,
take a look at that.
it's not strong. I was just saying I noticed, but I think it sounds like you've
Yeah, no,
looked at this more extensively than I already have.
I will make a
Um,
note to check on it again. Thank you, Colin.
The form-based code 2505 section.
Doesn't do anything.
Okay.
or one quick comment, and again, I apologize if this should have been brought up in our time. I noticed for the pedestrian street size, we've changed it to like the pavement width is from minimum 20 to maximum 50. And I guess, and whereas a path has a maximum of 14. So I guess I was slightly confused why you can't build a pedestrian street less than 20 feet wide. Like, say, bring it down to like 14. I guess I was curious where that 20 number, like, was it fire access or something? Where that 20?
It is fire access. 20 feet is on the very low end of what the fire department is okay with. Generally, they
Okay.
want even full streets to be 24. The other thing that we considered is the idea in our minds that of pedestrian street is that it would be sort of like if you took the width of the full width of a rec path and then had additional space for seating, sidewalk cafe, outside display, landscaping, planters, things like that. So adding 3 feet kind of on either side of the minimum of 14 felt like the minimum width of that kind of a street. Happy to move it up if that's what you're
Well,
talking about, but I don't think
I mean-
moving it down is helpful.
No, but I guess on that point, if we want to have planters on the side, so it'd be 20 feet, and that the whole putting stuff on the side will be like, because the fire department, can't drive through a bench. So like,
Right.
if you wanted to have like streetscape, it would then need to be 26 feet in that situation, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what
Okay.
we were trying to do is trying to have something that was large enough to make the fire department happy if, hypothetically, someone was not proposing those things, like was saying, like, it's just the side of the building and we have a flat front and we're not doing anything outside and that's it, as sort of the minimum case. And then the intention being more that you're more 30, 40 feet, kind of in the middle of that 20 to
Gotcha.
50 range is more the intended
Okay.
allowing a fairly low minimum and allowing a reasonably high maximum to allow someone to decide what they wanted to do for that. But
Yeah.
no, I hear what
But
you're
that
saying.
50
So
feet
it's
maximum is
it's kind of trying to accomplish two things at the same time, which is,
Yeah.
well,
'Cause
and
I guess
it's
it's
different than an alley, so it's hard.
yeah. Because the 50 foot maximum is also technically, I mean, I can't see, I mean, maybe church, I don't think church would fall under this, like a 15-foot wide stretch of pavement with no fixtures in it is, I mean, I don't think I would build that anyways.
Right,
But
I think that's-
regardless, okay, I'm happy with that answer. Thanks for bringing that context.
Sure,
there.
yeah, I think the only like 50, we're trying to be overly inclusive in some of these things to try to catch those cases. We didn't want someone to come in and say, oh, I want, we set the number at 45 and someone comes in, they're like, oh, well, look at my great design for 46. And we go, oh my God, we missed it. So sort of adding 10% on either side is sort of how we were approaching it. But yes, the thought is that if someone is truly making a street that's that wide, that their intention is likely to do something with it because pavement is expensive and you're not gonna do it unless you want to, and it's hot and it's, you know, everything else.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, no, that all, I hear what you're saying there. Yeah, cool.
We're gonna go on to 2506 bedrock removal.
Okay.
Okay. This all looks good. Okay, 2507 zoning district boundary adjustments. So this goes with the map.
Mhm.
These looked good to me.
I think we had
We've
talked
already
about all
talked about all of
those.
them,
Yeah, they're mostly just little bits and pieces that were either true mapping errors or are good policy decisions that we got from UVM and others.
So, that was, the sections as laid out. Does anyone have any other items? I know it wasn't always clear what was in each section.
I have a question related to the definitions, not that we don't have a definition for screening, although
Hmm,
it's mentioned
yeah,
twice.
yeah, so
It's-
screening.
It's in the note I sent you.
Okay, screening is a tricky one. It's one of those things that it is not defined, and my understanding of why it's not defined is there's sort of different levels and types of screening that are appropriate in different situations. There are certain situations where a solid wall is completely appropriate for, you know, completely blocking any headlights or whatever. But then there are other situations where the same thing, a solid wall on the edge of a parking lot, may make it feel more unsafe. So it's one of those things that the leaving screening undefined leaves room for the DRB to decide what is the appropriate amount of screening, how opaque, how solid, you know, is dense, like a densely planted hedge of this variety of plant sufficient, or do you need to do a different variety of plant? So I think that was, my understanding was before I came here, was that was intentional.
There is a kind of definition in section 806. 806 2A. That just be, if you.
Yep. There's some guidance,
Somewhere, some
Functional,
verbiage,
yeah, some sort of direction.
but
Or
can we
some shepherding.
make do without defining it?
I think it's been reasonably successful to go without defining it. There have been a few times that have come up in exactly the situation where I said, where it's like, you planted a bunch of shrubs, but they're deciduous shrubs, but they have very dense, you know, sticks, and is that enough? And, you know, it's something that the DRB will end up having to decide, like, does a screening, a vegetative screen have to be, you know, evergreen? Does it have to be a boxwood, box hedge, whatever the
Most of them
box
are arborvitaes.
arborvitaes, does it have to be certain things, or can you have sort of deciduous, like a bunch of willows, like a depth of willows, does that count? Can you have a picket fence plus willows, does that count? Like, so I think there's some intentional room in that definition. If we hear more from the DRB that they need more sort of tightening of that, then we can certainly look at that, but I think right at this minute, they're doing okay.
Okay.
Brian?
I really appreciate that comment from Michael. I know that there's like, we're trying to figure out sort of this loose area that screening is not like other hard infrastructure. But I think screening can also go very badly, both from repetitiveness of species, you know, can be an issue. But also, when I look around the city, the amount of screening around utility infrastructure that obscures sight lines or grows into the sidewalk, such that it would be very easy for a vehicle to turn and not see a pedestrian until they are in the act of turning over a crosswalk or onto a side street without a sidewalk. This is really common in this city in a particular way that I never encountered before living here.
You brought this up recently, and I think at the time, I couldn't come up with a thing that we would put in the LDRs to, like,
Was it
do you have a
determined-
suggestion of, like, you know, keeping screening a certain distance from a driveway, or like what?
Was the term that I used daylighting?
I don't know, in my head, I'm so in river mindset. I think daylighting, I think of taking a culvert and turning it into an open river, like it's so daylighting for
Fair,
me.
daylighting of
Feels very
intersections,
different, yeah.
I mean, there may be something we've done, yeah, in terms of, well, yeah, in terms of like, oh, you can't have obstructions visually within, X feet of an intersection. That's something in traffic design we come up with a lot with the state-owned right of way, like you don't want to obscure visibility of pedestrians. There may be a place for that too in land development regulations, though doing it right may be complicated. Not saying it shouldn't be done. It's just it may be a I can't immediately think of a quick a one-liner to accomplish the goals that we want to set up. But it is a good point. Like daylighting in this context, daylighting, making crosswalks and pedestrian key points visible is an important issue. I'm just not sure exactly how to quickly come up with a off-the-cuff way to.
Really a sightlines,
Yes, it's a sightlines
traffic-
issue. Yeah.
traffic sightlines issue is really what it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
I
there's a
just don't
lot
know
of
how to
it's more
translate that.
maintenance, a lot of it's more about maintenance, cause one shrub that's kept trimmed is fine, another shrub that goes crazy and grows 15 feet tall and 20 feet wide.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It becomes a
it-
problem.
Where the
recently-
definition might come in, because the objective is headlights, mostly. It's.
Well, in this
Well,
case,
mostly-
it's just being able to
I
see a
think
car
it's a
coming
lot of things, like in
Yeah.
our neighborhood,
or a pedestrian
in
crossing.
our neighborhood, we actually, the city came and actually like took down some vegetation in their right of way. Cause when you got to the end of our little road, you couldn't see down Patchen, like at all.
Yeah.
Like you'd have to be like in Patchen Road to be able to see if somebody
Right.
was coming, so it was like, in that case, it was like vegetation in the right of way that was
Safety
like.
concern.
Yeah.
And
It's
we
it's
have
a
similar-
it's
Yeah,
We have a similar situation right on my street because there's a big utility box there.
yeah.
And the vegetation is around it to just, beautify it. But it's quite large and it's really difficult to see. You have to kind of look before you get to it to see if anybody's coming. Cause once you get there, it's pretty blocked.
So
Yeah, that's
I feel like
anti-screening.
at this point, this is not a thing that's in the draft, like how do
Correct.
we, and it's almost like a site plan performance standard or something, or I don't even know what it would be.
What's in there right now is the screening of vegetation, a non-vinyl fence or a non-plastic wall of at least 4 feet in height. So takes care of most
Yeah.
headlight
I mean,
The questions that come up in that particular provision are primarily around the vegetation. What kind of vegetation, how much vegetation? Occasionally can the non-vinyl fence have gaps or not? But that's that provision. I think that the sort of sight lines at corners and like at intersections is a bigger thing. I think that.
yeah.
That's not screening, that's an object, that's an
That's right,
obstruction.
that's right of way ordinance.
Right,
It's,
right.
it's not, it may even be outside of our purview, the planning
Well,
commission's
it-
purview.
I mean, in theory, ideally, it'd be both because I mean, there's two separate issues of like, so like the right of way, the city or the state, whoever owns that road, is responsible, keeping sight lines good on that stuff. Like in an ideal world, the sight line requirements would extend in certain limited situations onto private property where, if those private property goes right up and impinges on a sight triangle, ideally you'd want to say, hey, you can't put a hedge in the corner of your lot for the reason of visibility. However, yeah, I mean, I do hear that I mean at least I'm quite into sight triangles, so that was something I spent a lot of time thinking about. It may be something that maybe we want to revisit at some point because I think it is something that's important, but I don't think we can quickly in this round of revisions. I'm not sure we could settle on something that would solve this concern of an unintentional byproduct of screening of obstructing sight lines.
Yeah, I guess I'd say the core of these amendments has been the push from city council to to update the form-based code. And that has already been a year since they sort of push that, and I am not in a position to be able to turn anything around on this topic by next Wednesday.
No, that's fine. This is a different thing. So
Yeah,
we
okay.
can, we don't need to
Yeah.
add a whole other thing.
Okay.
But we want to keep it in mind as we move forward. So, anything else? Okay, so this is kind of the end of this item, and then the next one is a possible action to warn. I think we vaguely said we had enough comments and things we wanted to change, and there's only 4 of us here tonight.
I
so
think that's
maybe it makes
the
sense
kicker
to-
for me
wait.
as for, staff guidance is there's a few things that were raised tonight that I'm happy to look in a little bit further. Donna's going to work up some something about the glare definitions, and for this scale of amendment, it would make me more comfortable as staff if the planning commission was warning it with a greater number of commissioners.
Yeah, I agree, and we had a few things we were a little vague on our
Yep.
guidance with tonight,
Yep.
so I'm gonna just propose we skip number 7, or we just had our discussion, we're not making a motion tonight. So that is number 7, and then number 8 is, well, I guess at the end of that, thank you, Kelsey, this is like a massive amount of work, and we just also threw some new little things at you,
Yeah.
which in my head might be little, but I think it's actually creates quite a bit.
No, I think in particular, from my perspective, the difference between the large indoor recreation and the small, like,
Yeah.
that makes a big difference about what you want to allow in different districts. Like, even if you're talking about like, oh, are there some things that fall on one side of the line or the other? Yes, there's always gonna be those things that, are caught in the wrong, quote, wrong category, but I'm part of this whole project about uses is allowing the most things that are compatible with the MSN as in particular, but also some in the LSN and the mixed use HSMU to be allowed in those areas. And I think that's something like a yoga studio, in the HSMU is totally legitimate, where, maybe a whole complex for tennis maybe isn't. So I think that's completely fine with me, very happy.
So I guess with that, we're gonna transition to the work plan, and I know we're already after 9 and there are only 4 of us, so I
Yep.
don't know how far we wanna get
You-
into this.
So you have to do it today.
We have to do what today?
You have to provide, if the planning commission would like to provide a recommendation to the city council for the FY 26 PPS, you have to do it today.
Oh, okay.
There's
then
a
we should
deadline
do
of
it
June
then we
2nd or
should do
something.
this today. Let's do it.
They're considered, I think it's June 2nd or June, whatever their next meeting is when
Okay,
they're
okay, I get
considering.
it. I see this June 3rd. For some reason, I was thinking that was
Third.
us like doing something different.
No,
Okay, well, we have this in the packet and we've all looked at it. And are there any comments?
so first, just a first background point, just to make sure everybody's clear, there's 2 things included. I'm just scrolling through all these reports. First is the sort of status update that we provide occasionally to you all about your FY 25 work. Looking back on the FY 25 PPS, we're pretty excited about how many things are either adopted or in progress to be finished very quickly. It's just sort of the landing of when the fiscal year turns over meant that a few things were not completed that are part of this round of amendments, so they will be. So that's that first table is the FY 25 PPS, and then the second is, that starts with a blue bar. Unfortunately, it's not the best formatting in the world, is our staff recommendations for the FY 26. And as you can see on the on the left, towards the left, there's a new / continued column. So there's a handful of things that are continued because they're in this round of amendments, so they will not have been adopted until after July 1st. So those are still in here. And then there's a few things that are ongoing projects that are being done primarily by other entities and or departments in the city. So stuff like the active transportation plan part 2, Mary Street, Williston Road intersection scoping, economic development strategic plan, parks and open space master plans. Those are all things that are being continued from this fiscal year to the next in other places in the city. So our recommendation is the planning commission.
Wanted to see if I'm looking at the same thing.
Yeah, it's the last.
Yeah, the
few
blue bar.
pages.
Yeah,
Page 357.
well, yeah, if you're going through the website, you can click on the individual like PDFs. Yeah, so that's just my little bit of guide posting.
Have we, what about this tree ordinance or tree ring?
Yeah, so that was something that the
It's not in here.
current city council did not put on last year's policy priorities and strategies. And when we took the draft policy priorities and strategies that Jesse gave to city council, and it's also not on it. So we were not, staff felt like there are enough things on the list that are continuing from this year and a few sort of new and or ongoing things for the planning commission to have on their plate. And even if that is something that went forward, I think there's other bodies that would be involved in sort of the greater scoping of it.
I think that
The NRCC,
they've had a draft already, right?
my understanding is that it was, I don't wanna say back to the drawing board, but a little bit, they did have a draft, but it's not the approach that was going to pass legal muster. Anyway, so it was kind of looped back and is not on the PPS draft this year.
I don't have any other comment on it.
Back with their committee, I guess.
I think it's still up to the council to say that. the
Right.
planning
Oh,
commission should do
okay, I
it.
see.
Right, it's
So
up
it's
to
not on
it's up
our
to the
list.
council to tell anybody to do it.
Any other comments on this?
Where did we leave? Because we had quite a bit of discussion about building heights.
It's in there.
Did that get adopted or
It's
not?
in here, yeah.
That's in the
It is
set of
still-
amendments.
It's still in this set of amendments.
That's part of the Nick's project about how heights are actually measured and things.
Exactly.
It's in that table in appendix C1.
Okay, I'll have to go back and
Yeah,
take a look at that
it before
again.
our next meeting, because I think we actually probably all should, because I know there was
Yeah,
discussion and we
there's-
just wanna make sure.
There are some changes to most heights are raised by a bit, but they're sort of raised in different ways.
Yeah, so that's in what we were talking about tonight, as well as continues to be on this list here, so.
Now, when you figured out how to, in what order to do this, did you use this list? Going from, going by LDR 2501, 2, 3, 4, what we were discussing this evening, because,
What's this thing here?
well, this is, you can get, let's pick one. I used these because I looked at the red line, I read through the red line and then I looked at the clean. So this is Article 3.
Are you on the
Oh,
website?
he's just going through the website. I was
Yes.
looking.
You what?
So
I was looking in the PDF.
there's two, in the agenda memo, there was, our amendments are numbered by topic. So there were 6, 7 amendments to the LDRs and 1 to the official map. And we had separated the highlights of what had changed since the last time you saw amendments in those topic areas, because up till today, you've been seeing everything individually as like, here's the height stuff, here's the uses stuff, here's whatever stuff, but that's not how our LDRs are structured. So on the website, what you see is the articles.
Hmm.
So article, 1, 2, 3,
Yep.
or whatever, et cetera. Those are the articles of the LDR, so they
Chapter by
like
chapter,
chapter by chapter, so.
which is
you
how
know.
I went through it.
Okay,
So-
yeah, it's just 2 different ways to slice it. The same things.
Did you have a thing related to our work plan related to this?
I thought
No
we were done with
comment.
that.
We were done with the work plan, we need to vote on it.
You need to vote on the work plan.
I mean,
Vote-
I didn't
let me
see anything
clarify.
in there.
Okay, Michael moved on.
Vote on the recommendation of the planning commission to city council. City
wants-
council will then vote and do their own thing, and it will come back down to you, and we'll be able to write a work plan from what comes back.
Okay, since I have it open here. Doing all the moving stuff, I don't usually do it.
I know.
I move to approve the draft fiscal year 26 planning commission work plan as presented. And to submit to city council.
Second.
I think Donna won the second with the here. So, any discussion? Or from the audience? Okay, all in favor? Let's see, Michael,
Michael, I.
Donna,
I,
Colin,
Aye.
Jessica, I.
Thank you.
Cast unanimous. Other business?
Not from me.
Okay, then we are adjourned.
Goody goody.
Very good. Nice job. I thought I might run out of battery and I didn't.
Thank you.
Sorry about the break.